"You're not coming on the cruise." That was the message my daughter-in-law sent me at 8:07 on a Tuesday morning. No greeting. No explanation. Just 6 words that told me everything I needed to know. I read the text twice. Then a third time. The words didn't change. For a moment, I simply sat at my kitchen table, staring through the window above the sink. The hydrangeas outside were in full bloom, just as they had been every summer for the past 20 years. My late husband, Richard, used to trim them himself. He said a home should always have something beautiful waiting outside the window. After he passed away 3 years ago, I tried to keep everything the way he liked it. The house, the garden, the traditions. Most of all, the family. I had spent months looking forward to that cruise. Not because I cared about tropical beaches or buffet dinners. At 69, I was far more interested in spending time with my family than sipping fancy drinks on a ship. My son Daniel had mentioned the trip several times. My grandchildren had talked excitedly about swimming pools and ocean sunsets. Every conversation made me feel included. Or at least that's what I thought. Then came that text. I opened our family group chat. The silence suddenly made sense. Photos of suitcases. Discussions about excursions. Reservations. Activities. Hundreds of messages. Somehow, I had been removed weeks ago and never noticed. My chest tightened, but not from anger. Something colder settled inside me. Understanding. I finally saw the truth that had been building for years. Christmas dinners scheduled without asking me. Birthdays I learned about through social media. Family weekends that somehow happened while I was told everyone was too busy. None of it had been accidental. I stood up slowly and walked through the house. The living room still held Richard's favorite chair. The hallway displayed photographs from decades of birthdays, graduations, anniversaries, and holidays. Every wall told the story of a family I had spent 40 years putting first. Yet somehow, I had become an afterthought in my own life. At 9:15, I made a phone call. At 9:42, I made another. By 10:30, I was sitting across from a real estate attorney. He looked surprised when I explained what I wanted. "You're certain?" he asked. I nodded. For the first time in years, I felt completely certain about something. By noon, paperwork was moving. By early afternoon, a buyer had expressed serious interest. Everything happened so quickly, it almost felt unreal. But the truth was, the decision hadn't begun that morning. It had been forming quietly through every forgotten invitation, every ignored phone call, every moment I convinced myself not to take personally. The text had simply removed the last illusion. Meanwhile, somewhere, my family was probably boarding a cruise ship, laughing and taking pictures. They thought they were leaving me behind. What they didn't know was that before their ship even left the harbor, the life they expected to return to was already disappearing. The attorney's office overlooked Charleston Harbor. Through the window, I could see sailboats moving slowly across the water, their white sails bright against the afternoon sun. 3 years earlier, Richard and I had stood on that same waterfront sharing ice cream after a doctor's appointment. Back then, I believed we still had decades ahead of us. Life has a way of changing plans without asking permission. "Mrs. Whitmore, there is one thing I need to ask," the attorney said as he reviewed the paperwork. "Why now?" I almost laughed. Not because the question was funny, but because the answer was so simple. People always imagine that life-changing decisions happen in dramatic moments. They picture shouting matches or spectacular betrayals. The truth is usually quieter. Decisions like mine are built one small disappointment at a time. I thought about the previous Christmas. Daniel had called 2 days before dinner. Lauren had apparently decided they would celebrate at her sister's house instead. They promised they would visit me afterward. They never did. I thought about my granddaughter's piano recital 6 months earlier. I learned about it from photographs online. When I asked Daniel why nobody had told me, he seemed genuinely surprised. "I thought Lauren invited you," he had said. Somehow, there was always an explanation, always a misunderstanding, always a reason I was expected to accept. The attorney slid another document across the desk. I signed without hesitation. Outside, a warm breeze moved across the harbor. For the first time in years, I felt strangely calm. Not happy, not angry, just clear. By 4 o'clock, the first prospective buyer requested a private showing. The timing surprised even the realtor. Charleston's housing market had been strong, but I still expected the process to take weeks. Instead, everything seemed determined to move forward. Perhaps the universe occasionally helps people who finally stop standing still. When I returned home that evening, the house felt different. It was still beautiful. The hardwood floors Richard had refinished himself still gleamed in the fading sunlight. The grandfather clock in the hallway still marked each passing hour. Yet something had shifted inside me. The house was no longer a monument to memories. It had become a doorway. I made myself a simple dinner and ate alone at the kitchen table. The same table where countless family meals had taken place. The same table where Daniel used to do homework while Richard grilled hamburgers in the backyard. I remembered a little boy with scraped knees and endless questions. I remembered soccer games, science fairs, and birthday cakes. Somewhere between those memories and the present day, distance had quietly replaced connection. My phone buzzed just after 7. For a moment, I thought it might be Daniel. Instead, it was a social media notification. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened the app and immediately regretted it. There they were. Lauren smiling beneath a bright blue sky. My grandchildren waving from the deck of a cruise ship. Daniel standing beside them with his arm around his wife. The caption read, "Family time is the best time." I stared at those words for several seconds. Then I set the phone face down on the table. Surprisingly, I did not cry. The tears had already been spent over the years on smaller disappointments. What remained was something stronger. Acceptance. The next morning, the realtor called before breakfast. 3 offers had already come in. One of them was all cash and well above asking price. I looked around the kitchen one more time. Then I smiled softly. While my family was sailing farther away from me with every passing mile, I was finally moving towards something new. The offer was accepted before lunch on Thursday. Just like that, the house that had been the center of my life for nearly 4 decades officially belonged to someone else. The realtor called to congratulate me, but her voice sounded distant, almost muffled. I was standing in the upstairs hallway looking at a faded pencil mark on the wall. Daniel had made it when he was 12 years old. Richard had measured his height every summer. There were dozens of marks stretching upward through the years, each one a small reminder of a life that once felt permanent. I ran my fingers across the wall and smiled. Some memories belong in your heart. They do not need a house to survive. The buyers wanted a quick closing. That suited me perfectly. Over the next 2 days, I began sorting through everything I owned. It was amazing how little truly mattered. The expensive dining room furniture stayed. The decorative dishes stayed. Half the things stored in closets stayed. What I packed instead fit into a handful of boxes. Family photographs. Richard's old wristwatch. A quilt my grandmother made in 1958. The letters Richard wrote me when he traveled for work during our early years of marriage. Those were the things worth carrying forward. Everything else was simply stuff. On Friday evening, another photograph appeared online. My granddaughter was holding an ice cream cone nearly as large as her face. Daniel was laughing beside her. Lauren stood behind them wearing oversized sunglasses and a bright white hat. Hundreds of people had clicked the little heart beneath the image. Comments filled the screen. Beautiful family. Wonderful memories. Perfect vacation. I studied the photograph longer than I should have. Then I noticed something unexpected. Daniel's smile looked forced. It was subtle. Most people would never see it. But I had spent 42 years watching that face grow from a baby into a man. Mothers noticed things. Something was bothering him. For a brief moment, I wondered if he had finally realized what had happened. Then I closed the application and set the phone aside. Whatever Daniel felt was his responsibility now. For too many years, I had carried burdens that belonged to other people. The following morning, I met my friend Carol for breakfast. We had known each other since high school. If anyone could understand what I was doing, it was her. She listened quietly as I explained everything. When I finished, she stirred her coffee and shook her head. "You know," she said, "this is not really about a cruise." I laughed softly. "No, it is not. It is about all the years before the cruise." Exactly. That was the part nobody else seemed to understand. The vacation was only the final chapter. The story itself had started long ago. It began with invitations that never arrived. Phone calls that were never returned. Holidays where I was treated more like a guest than family. Tiny cuts. Tiny disappointments. None serious enough to confront. Yet together they created a wound that never healed. Later that afternoon, I drove to the cemetery. Richard's headstone sat beneath a large oak tree overlooking a peaceful stretch of grass. I brought fresh flowers and sat beside him for nearly an hour. The breeze moved gently through the branches overhead. For the first time since his death, I felt as though I was speaking honestly. I think it is time, I whispered. I think I finally have to let go. The answer, of course, never came. But somehow I felt lighter when I stood to leave. As I walked back toward my car, my phone suddenly began ringing. I glanced at the screen. Daniel's name was flashing across it. I stared at the screen while the phone continued ringing. For a second, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Then I answered, "Hello, Daniel." There was a brief pause on the other end. The sound of wind and distant voices drifted through the connection. "Mom," he said, "I have been trying to reach you." His voice sounded uneasy. Not panicked. Not yet. Just unsettled. "I have been busy," I replied. Another silence followed. Daniel had always struggled with uncomfortable conversations. Even as a child, he would circle around difficult subjects instead of facing them directly. "How are things?" he finally asked. I looked out through the windshield at the cemetery entrance. The late afternoon sunlight painted long shadows across the grass. "They are fine." "Good. Good." More silence. Then he cleared his throat. "Mom, Lauren said she sent you a message earlier this week." There it was. Not an apology. Not an explanation. Just a careful attempt to test the water. She did. I think maybe there was some confusion. I almost smiled. Confusion. That word again. It seemed to follow every disappointment of the last several years. Somehow, every exclusion, every forgotten invitation, every hurtful decision always transformed into confusion once somebody was forced to acknowledge it. "Was there?" I asked calmly. Daniel hesitated. "Lauren thought maybe you would not enjoy the trip." I closed my eyes for a moment. Not because the excuse hurt. It did not. The truth had already done its work. What surprised me was how familiar the explanation sounded. It was the same pattern. Decisions made without me. Explanations offered afterward. "That was thoughtful of her," I said. My tone must have caught him off guard because he immediately sounded relieved. "Exactly. That is what I told her." She was trying to help. I looked up at the clouds drifting slowly across the Carolina sky. Richard used to say that people reveal themselves most clearly when they think nobody is paying attention. Over the years, I had watched Lauren make countless decisions on behalf of other people. Restaurants, holiday plans, birthday schedules, school events. Gradually, she stopped asking. Gradually, everyone else stopped questioning it, including Daniel. "I am glad you are enjoying your vacation," I said. "Mom." His voice sharpened slightly. "Are you upset?" It was such a simple question, yet answering honestly would have taken hours. Was I upset about the cruise? Not really. Was I upset about the years that led to it? The years of becoming invisible while standing in plain sight? That was a different story. "No," I said truthfully. "I am not upset." Confused people become angry. Hurt people cry. I had moved. Beyond both. The conversation ended a few minutes later. Daniel seemed reassured. Whatever concern had prompted the call appeared to fade. Before hanging up, he promised they would visit when they returned home. I wished him a pleasant trip and ended the call. Then I sat quietly for several minutes. The strange thing was that I felt lighter than before. For years, every interaction with my family had left me carrying something heavy. Guilt, worry, disappointment, hope. Now there was nothing left to carry. The following Monday, the closing documents arrived. Everything moved faster than anyone expected. I signed the final pages shortly after 10 in the morning. By noon, the funds had been transferred. The house was officially sold. When the realtor shook my hand, she smiled warmly. "Congratulations on your next chapter." Next chapter. I liked the sound of that. Because for the first time in a very long while, my life no longer felt like a waiting room. And somewhere hundreds of miles away, while cruise ships crossed open water and vacation photographs continued appearing online, my family still had no idea that the foundation beneath their expectations had already disappeared. The movers arrived early Wednesday morning. 3 trucks lined the curb outside the house, their engines humming softly in the warm air. I stood on the front porch with a cup of coffee and watched strangers carry away the furniture that had filled my life for decades. Surprisingly, it did not feel tragic. It felt necessary. Each box that left the house seemed to remove another layer of weight from my shoulders. By noon, the rooms echoed when I walked through them. The walls looked larger. The ceilings seemed higher. Empty spaces have a way of revealing the truth. I realized how much of my life had been spent holding on to things simply because I thought I was supposed to. The dining table where nobody gathered anymore. The guest room nobody used. The traditions nobody respected. Sometimes letting go is not loss. Sometimes it is freedom. That afternoon, I drove to a small storage facility and placed a handful of boxes inside a climate-controlled unit. Everything important fit into a space, smaller than a walk-in closet. Richard's letters, family photographs, personal keepsakes. The entire history of what mattered most could be carried in the back of my car. As I locked the unit, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. For years, I had believed the house protected my memories. Now I understood the opposite was true. The memories had protected me. The house had merely been the address where they lived. Later that evening, Carol stopped by with takeout from our favorite seafood restaurant. We sat on folding chairs in the nearly empty living room, eating shrimp and talking about everything except the future. At one point, she glanced around the room and laughed softly. You know, if somebody walked in right now, they would think you were starting over at 25 instead of 69. I smiled. Maybe that is exactly what I am doing. She raised her sweet tea in a mock toast. To second chances. After she left, I walked through the house one final time. The master bedroom was empty except for a lamp and a suitcase. The closet stood open. The shelves were bare. Moonlight spilled across the hardwood floors. I remembered moving in with Richard all those years ago. We had almost no furniture then. No savings. No certainty. Just optimism and determination. Somehow, standing in that empty house, I felt closer to that younger version of myself than I had in years. The next morning, my phone remained unusually quiet. No calls from Daniel. No messages from Lauren. The cruise ship was still somewhere in the Caribbean, and judging by the photographs appearing online, everyone seemed busy enjoying themselves. One image caught my attention. Lauren stood on a balcony overlooking the ocean, smiling confidently at the camera. Beneath the photo, she had written, "Cannot wait to get home." I stared at those words for several seconds before setting the phone aside. Home. It was amazing how people could use a word without understanding what it meant. A home is not something you inherit. It is not something you assume will always be waiting. It belongs to the people who value it. By Friday afternoon, I handed over the final set of keys. The new owners were a young couple expecting their first child. They looked excited and nervous at the same time. I recognized the expression immediately. Richard and I had worn the same look when we bought the place. As I drove away, I checked the rearview mirror one last time. Then I turned my eyes toward the road ahead. Because for the first time in a very long while, that was where my future was waiting. By the time the cruise ship began its journey back toward Florida, I was already halfway to Maine. The drive took 2 days. I stopped when I felt tired, stayed in small roadside hotels, and listened to old music Richard loved. Somewhere in Virginia, I realized I had not checked social media in nearly 24 hours. It felt wonderful. For years, I had measured my connection to family through photographs on a screen. Now I was watching mountains roll past my windshield instead. Real life was finally happening in front of me again. The cottage I rented sat on a quiet stretch of coastline just outside a small town. It was nothing extravagant. 2 bedrooms, a tiny kitchen, a porch overlooking the water. The kind of place people overlooked because it lacked grand features. I loved it immediately. On my first morning there, I woke before sunrise and carried a cup of coffee outside. The Atlantic stretched endlessly before me. Waves moved gently against the rocks below. Seagulls drifted through the pale morning sky. The silence felt different from the silence I had known in Charleston. That silence had been filled with absence. This silence felt filled with possibility. Over the next several days, I settled into a routine. I unpacked my boxes, hung photographs, placed Richard's watch in a drawer beside the bed. For the first time in years, every decision belonged entirely to me. No schedules, no expectations, no waiting for phone calls that never came. One afternoon, while exploring the town, I met an older woman named Evelyn who owned a small bookstore near the harbor. We started talking about mystery novels and ended up sharing lunch at a nearby cafe. Before long, she was introducing me to half the town. It amazed me how quickly strangers could make you feel welcome when the people closest to you had forgotten how. A week passed, then another. The cruise had long since ended. Still, my phone remained mostly quiet. A few missed calls from Daniel. One voicemail I never listened to. Several messages asking where I was. None of them asked how I was. I noticed that detail immediately. Where are you? Call us. We need to talk. Nobody wrote, "Are you happy? Are you okay?" The difference mattered. One rainy afternoon, I finally opened my email. Buried among advertisements and newsletters sat a message from Daniel. It was longer than the others. For several minutes, I simply stared at the screen. Then I opened it. He wrote that they had returned home and found strangers living in the house. He wrote that Lauren had been shocked. The children were confused. He wrote that nobody understood why I had done something so drastic without warning them. I read every word carefully. Then I read it again. What struck me most was not what he said. It was what he left out. There was no mention of the years leading up to that moment. No acknowledgement of the loneliness. No recognition of the countless times I had been excluded. In his version of events, everything had begun with the sale of the house. In mine, that was merely the ending. I closed the email and walked outside. The rain had stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds and scattered across the water. Standing there, I suddenly understood something important. Sometimes people are not surprised by your pain. They are surprised by your refusal to keep carrying it. And for the first time in a very long while, I had finally put mine down. 3 weeks after arriving in Maine, I finally listened to Daniel's voicemail. I sat on the porch overlooking the water while the late afternoon sun turned the waves silver. His voice sounded tired. Older somehow. "Mom, please call me. We just want to understand." That sentence stayed with me long after the recording ended. Understand. It was a curious word. People often ask for understanding when they are forced to face consequences they never expected. I thought about calling him back. More than once, I picked up my phone and stared at his number. Each time, I set it down. Again, not out of anger, not out of spite. I simply needed something I had not had in years. Time. Time to hear my own thoughts without somebody else's expectations filling the silence. Life in Maine settled into a comfortable rhythm. Every morning, I walked along the shoreline before breakfast. Every Tuesday, I helped Evelyn organize new arrivals at the bookstore. On weekends, I joined a small group of locals for coffee near the harbor. None of these people knew me as Daniel's mother or Lauren's mother-in-law. They knew me as Margaret. Just Margaret. The simplicity felt refreshing. One afternoon, Evelyn glanced up from a stack of books and asked a question nobody had asked in years. "What do you want to do next?" I opened my mouth to answer and realized I had no idea. For most of my adult life, my plans revolved around other people. Richard's career, Daniel's school schedule, family gatherings, holiday traditions. Even after Richard passed away, I continued organizing my life around a family that seemed increasingly determined to organize theirs without me. The realization was both painful and liberating. That evening, I enrolled in a photography class at the community center. It was something I had wanted to do for years. Richard always encouraged me, but there had never seemed to be enough time. Now there was nothing but time. A few days later, another email from Daniel arrived. This one felt different. Shorter, more honest. He wrote that he had been reviewing old photographs with the children. He said they kept asking why Grandma no longer lived in Charleston. He admitted he did not know how to answer. Then came a sentence that made me stop reading for a moment. I think I missed more than I realized. I stared at those words while the room grew quiet around me. For the first time, there was no explanation, no excuse, no mention of confusion, just a small acknowledgement that something had gone wrong. It was not enough to repair the past, but it was enough to make me pause. Later that night, I sat on the porch and watched fishing boats return to shore beneath a sky filled with stars. The air smelled of salt and pine. Somewhere hundreds of miles away, Daniel was probably sitting in the house he now rented, trying to understand how everything had changed so quickly. The truth was that nothing had changed quickly at all. The change had happened one overlooked moment at a time, one forgotten invitation at a time, one decision made without me at a time. The only sudden part was when I finally stopped accepting it. And as I listened to the waves breaking softly against the rocks below, I realized something unexpected. For the first time in years, I was no longer waiting for anyone to choose me. I had finally chosen myself. Autumn arrived quietly along the Maine coast. The mornings grew cooler, and the trees surrounding the harbor slowly exchanged their summer greens for shades of gold and crimson. One Saturday afternoon, while I was helping Evelyn arrange a display of local history books, my phone rang again. This time, I answered. Daniel sounded nervous. Not defensive, not frustrated, just nervous. "Mom, thank you for picking up." I looked through the bookstore window toward the harbor. "Hello, Daniel." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he took a deep breath. I have been thinking about a lot of things lately. Something in his voice felt different, more honest than before. "The kids miss you," he continued. "They ask about you all the time." I smiled sadly. "I miss them too. that had never changed. How are they? I asked. The conversation drifted towards school projects, soccer games, and ordinary family details. Then Daniel said something unexpected. Mom, I found some old emails. I remained silent. Messages from years ago. Invitations Lauren said she sent. They were never sent. My grip tightened slightly around the phone. Outside, a fishing boat moved slowly across the water. I started looking into other things, he said. Birthdays, holidays, family plans. A lot of decisions were made without me realizing what was happening. There was no anger in his voice, only disappointment. The kind that comes when someone finally sees a truth they had avoided for a long time. I should have paid more attention, he said quietly. I closed my eyes. Those words carried more weight than any apology. Because they were honest. Daniel was not blaming Lauren. He was accepting responsibility for his own absence. I cannot change the past, he continued. But I needed you to know that I finally understand some of it. Some of it. Not all. Perhaps nobody could ever fully understand another person's loneliness. Still, it was a beginning. After we ended the call, I walked home slowly. The ocean air felt crisp against my face. For months, I had imagined what this moment might feel like. Vindication. Satisfaction. Victory. Instead, I felt something much simpler. Relief. Not because Daniel was suffering. I never wanted that. Relief because the truth no longer belonged only to me. That evening, another message arrived. This one was from my granddaughter. A photograph of a school art project. Beneath it she had written, I wish you could see it in person, Grandma. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I smiled. Relationships are rarely repaired through grand speeches. More often, they begin with small moments. A phone call, a message, a willingness to listen. Standing on my porch as the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, I realized that the most important thing I had gained was not the money from the house or the freedom of a new life. It was clarity. I no longer needed anyone's approval to feel valued. And because of that, for the first time in years, I was finally able to decide what place my family would have in my future rather than letting them decide it for me. 6 months later, winter arrived along the Maine coast. The harbor was quieter now. The tourist crowds had disappeared, and the mornings began with a thin layer of frost covering the docks. I had grown to love the rhythm of this place. The bookstore, the photography classes, the evening walks along the shoreline. The life I built here was smaller than the one I left behind, but somehow it felt fuller. One Saturday afternoon, a familiar car pulled into the parking lot beside the harbor cafe. I recognized it immediately. Daniel stepped out first, then my 2 grandchildren. For a moment, nobody moved. We simply looked at each other across the distance. Then my granddaughter ran forward and wrapped her arms around me. I held her tightly, breathing in the scent of winter air and shampoo. Some things do not need words. Daniel approached more slowly. He looked older than I remembered. Not because of age, because of reflection. Life has a way of changing people when they finally begin paying attention. We spent the afternoon together. We walked through town, shared lunch, talked about ordinary things. School, books, photography, weather. The conversation felt surprisingly natural. At one point, Daniel stopped beside the harbor and looked out at the water. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. I did not answer immediately. The waves rolled against the rocks below us. A fishing boat moved slowly toward the horizon. I should have seen what was happening, he continued. Not just at the end. Long before that. I nodded. Yes, you should have. There was no anger in my voice. Only truth. He lowered his eyes. I spent years assuming there would always be more time. I understood that feeling better than he realized. Most people believe relationships can survive neglect forever. They assume love will wait patiently while attention goes elsewhere. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it does not. We stood there in silence for several moments. Then Daniel smiled sadly. The strange thing is that losing the house was not what hurt most. I looked at him. What was? He glanced toward his children playing near the harbor railing. Realizing how close I came to losing you. For the first time, I saw the little boy who used to leave muddy footprints across my kitchen floor. The teenager who asked endless questions. The young man who cried at his father's funeral. He had never disappeared completely. He had simply gotten lost beneath years of distractions and assumptions. That evening, before they left, my granddaughter handed me a small envelope. Inside was a photograph she had taken during her visit. The picture showed all of us standing together near the water, smiling beneath a pale winter sky. On the back, she had written a single sentence. I am glad we found our way back. After they drove away, I returned to my cottage and placed the photograph beside Richard's watch. Then I stepped onto the porch and looked out across the dark ocean. The journey that brought me here had begun with exclusion, disappointment, and loss. But that was not how it ended. It ended with something far more valuable. Clarity, self-respect, peace. I once thought my family had left me behind. The truth was much simpler. They booked a trip without me. I built a life without them. And when they finally came looking, they discovered I was no longer waiting to be chosen. I had already chosen myself.